I'm delighted to welcome back to the Celtic Exchange a man that anyone with even a passing interest in Scottish football needs no introduction to, and is the author of Twists and Turns, the story of someone who means so much to so many Celtic fans. Hugh Keevins is lucky enough to have got closer than most to the great man that was and is Tommy Burns. Now, on the week that Tommy would have celebrated his 68th birthday, the book has been re-released to allow a new generation of fans to enjoy the story of one of Celtic's greatest ever heroes. Hugh, welcome back to the show. What is it about Tommy Burns that means that he's just so highly revered by the Celtic support?
Well, my daughter put it to me the other day that he just holds a unique place in the hearts of the Celtic fans. And my daughter, who's now in her 50s, I gave her the copy of the original book 35 years ago, and she still has it. And it's unique because it was signed by Tommy Burns. Even my copy was not signed by Tommy Burns. I never thought to ask him, to be perfectly honest. And I said to my daughter, you know, that 35 years later, Celtic are bringing the book back out. And it does have a unique value for some Celtic supporters. And I said, yours is unique because Tommy signed it. And he said, no matter what was offered for the book, I would never, ever sell it. And, you know, they were children when Tommy and I were writing the book. And I've always said I could write a book about writing the book. But I'm just grateful to Celtic that they have brought it back out again 16 years after Tommy tragically passed away, 35 years after the book was originally published. But the Tommy Burns legend is abiding.
Exactly that. The legend lives on, and it's, as you say, it's now 35 years since the book originally came out, 1989.
Yeah.
Pretty rare for any football biography to be re-released some 3 decades after they hung up the book, so isn't it? So why, as you say, you know, Tommy Burns endures. Why is that?
Because he was Celtic. You know, for the supporters, he was the supporter with a jersey, as he always said. And he had the classic working class background, and he rose to the top. In the book, he tells the story of all those who were released, who came as a batch, including him, and he deliberately named every one of them who is released to let them know that they would be remembered because they were at Celtic at one point. He just didn't want to be singled out as the one who made it at Celtic. Mm-hmm. He was so in tune with all of the fans, and that was also the case when he became the manager.
Yeah.
And for the remainder of his life, Tommy Burns just was Celtic.
Am I right in saying the book, so we're 35 years down the track, but we've had a wee chat before coming on air here, it's been re-released absolutely in its original guise, no changes, no edits, no nothing?
I offered to write a chapter updating the book, but no, Celtic wanted it to be the original, untouched version, and it's really poignant for me because I opened it up again at the weekend just to remind myself of things, and the first thing that struck me was that the dedication that Tommy put to the book, the first part of it is to Rosemary, who was the making of Tommy Burns. I love you more each day. Well, as we all know, sadly, Rosemary passed away a few months ago. Mm-hmm. But there she is, part of that 3-part dedication. And even the dedication is a story there.
Yep.
Because I'm sitting in my newspaper office and the lady at the reception desk called through and said, Tommy Burns is here. I'll just send him through. And he came and he had the dedication handwritten on a piece of paper. And the part about Rosemary was self-explanatory. The last part of it, to the Celtic supporters, thanks for accepting me. You'll never walk alone, Tommy Burns. But it was the dedication in the middle. To Our Blessed Lady, my thanks for carrying me through all the hard times and keeping my feet on the ground on the many great times, your servant. And he said to me, will that be okay, son? Mm. And I said, well, Tommy, it's quite straightforward. If it's not okay with the publisher, they don't get the book because it belongs to you and me. Mm. But of course, I called them and I told them, and they said, of course, not a problem. So even the dedication, there was something special behind that story.
Absolutely. And there's a line, there's a term that's synonymous with Tommy Burns, and it's faith, family, and football. And all three elements are covered there. So faith, the Virgin Mary, family, Rosemary, football, Celtic, and that. Those three words kind of sum up Tommy Burns in succinct fashion, don't they?
I remember Billy Stark when Tommy and Starkey were the management team. And of course, you'd get there for the lunchtime press conference and there was no sign of Tommy. And Starkey would say, "Oh, he's at St Alphonsus."
Yeah.
And he always comes back better for it. Now, Tommy just came back after the lunchtime mass at St Alphonsus and he was just serene.
Yeah.
People who are perhaps of no faith might not understand that, but he came back the better for having been at the lunchtime mass at St Alphonsus.
And did that make for a better press conference?
His press conferences were great anyway, but he was late for every one of them, without exception. Punctuality wasn't a great thing for Tommy, but very, very special man.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us about the title, Hugh, Twists and Turns. Tell us why that was the title you guys chose.
Well, I can tell you it took me 23 minutes to walk from my house then in Clydebank to the Radio Clyde studio. And the phone rang as I was going up the garden path to begin the walk, and it was Tommy. And he said, "It's about the title of the book, son." And I said, "Uh-huh." He said, "Rosemary doesn't like it." And I said, "Well, what does Rosemary think it should be called?" Now, all the while I'm walking towards Radio Clyde, as I say, it took 23 minutes, and the phone call, therefore, I know, took 23 minutes. Rosemary thinks it should be called Hail, Hail. And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, Hail, Hail, the Celts." I said, "I know what it means, but what's that got to do with you?" I said, the supporters' song for you is Tommy Twists, Tommy Turns, Tommy Burns. That's about you. The book's got to be about that. So he went back and told Rosemary, and Rosemary understood, and we were good to go then. Yeah,
the rest is history. Tell us about your earliest dealings with, I guess, the young Tommy Burns, the player, the fiery redhead and all that stuff. How did you get on in those earlier days?
Well, I think we understood each other because I came from a normal background in Partick, and Tommy was Soho Street in Picalton. And right away I was drawn to this boy, apart from the ability, that unbelievable red hair. And we just get talking. I'm slightly older than Tommy by 7 years. But there was an immediate rapport, and players like Johnny Doyle were forever in the background winding everybody up, and we used to go and have lunch together. In those days, access to players was no problem whatsoever. And I'd call him and say, "You fancy a bit of lunch?" And Doyley would turn up, or Davy Proven, or so great times. And you simply grow the relationship to the extent that when Celtic wanted Tommy to be manager, I remember leaving Celtic Park after a game, and Tommy was at Kilmarnock, of course. And I called him and I said, "You're too young for this." "I know, but the chance might never pass me by again, so I'll take it." And I said, "Well, good luck. I'll help you in any way I can."
What age was he? 35? 30, something like that?
94 he came in succession to Louis Macari.
He'd be 38 then, born in 1956. Would that be about right?
Yeah, so, he was young. But as the Celtic supporters will remember, great teams. He only got one cup from those years. He always spoke about Andy Gorham at Rangers, and how he had defied Celtic throughout that time. But the football was great. The trophy haul was not so great. But the night that he left, I remember Rosemary speaking to her on the phone. She was obviously distraught. And when I got to Tommy, he said that he'd been offered the chance to go out by a side door. And he said, "I came into Celtic through the front door, and I'll leave Celtic through the front door." And of course, many managers, do you know, who get the sack and they come outside and there's a massive crowd there chanting your name.
Yeah.
And that addresses the fact that Tommy Burns was, in the eyes of the Celtic supporters, a unique person.
Yeah, absolutely. For folk of my age, Hugh, I'm born in 81, so I've kind of just caught the tail end of Tommy's playing career, you know, culminating maybe in the centenary season, all the brilliant memories from then. But for those maybe of my age or younger, tell us a bit more about Tommy the talent, Tommy the footballer.
Yeah, just extremely gifted, had an eye for goal as well. It was just the sheer joy of playing for Celtic that he always conveyed to the fans. And, you know, Tommy in the jungle, that was a love story. And they knew that he was out there as their representative on the park. And he loved the games against Rangers. But Tommy Burns, I mean, everyone remembers that Walter Smith and Alan McCoist helped carry Tommy into St Mary's and Abercrombie Street. And that was Tommy Burns loved Celtic and wanted to beat Rangers, but it never got out of hand. He had too much respect for people because he understood how hard it is to play for Celtic and to manage Celtic, and therefore he understood how hard it was for them to play for Rangers or manage Rangers. But just lovely, gifted, silky player, as they called them then. Not afraid to have a tackle at the same time. And there's a Muhammad Ali quote that the will has to be greater than the skill. And the will that he had for Celtic, the will to succeed, was greater than the skill. But the skill was high.
Yeah, the skill was there, all right. In terms of his character, in terms of his personality, Hugh, was he the same character as a young fiery player in his 20s to the man who would go on to manage Celtic, as we've covered there, in his late 30s, for returning then as a coach in his mid to late 40s? Was he same throughout? Did you see him evolve, change? What was your take on his personality?
Once he'd gone. You know, there was no point after a game in trying to reason with him if it had gone badly. And I remember when he was manager and he lost to Wraith Rovers in the League Cup final at Ibrox. And I remember they are part of the Radio Clyde commentary team, and I was sent down immediately after the game was over, and the only way you could reach the track was by going down the tunnel like the players. And Tommy was coming towards me. Now, I'd known Tommy for years and years by that time, but he was staring straight ahead. He didn't just walk past me. He didn't know I was there. He was just lost in the moment. And the following day, I went over to Celtic Park, and I think I'd been critical of Celtic on the radio after the final, and he went through me. Absolutely went through me. And I thought to myself then, I'm getting what players are getting in the dressing room here, and it was quite a formidable sight. It didn't matter about friendship. He just went through me.
In a way, do you admire the fact that he'd done so? Because your friendship's your friendship, but he's got a job to do for Celtic, as you've got a job to do for Radio Clyde.
Yeah.
And at that moment in time, you're both doing your job, you're doing what you're paid to do. Do you admire that side of it?
Yeah, I always say to people, it's business. It's never personal, it's business. At that point, he wasn't talking to Hugh Keevins, his old pal.
Yeah.
He was talking to a journalist who had said something that he vehemently disagreed with. So I got the full treatment in the same way that any player would have done. So it was, at the time, terrifying is probably too strong a word, but it was a moment to remember.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it'd be too much fun at the time.
And this is a boy from the Carlton, remember? You know.
Yeah. Tell us about what I think would have been more enjoyable for you, the process of sitting with Tommy, spending countless hours and actually putting his story to paper.
Well, the best story is that the ending of the book, where I've called him and I've said, Tommy, the publisher's going mad we're way behind schedule. You're going to have to come to my house Saturday, Sunday, and we'll have to get it completed. Just need to. Tommy turned up, and Saturday afternoon, and my wife and our 3 children always went to see both the grannies on the Saturday afternoon. So it was hugs and kisses all round. Tommy, the kids, my wife, and they left. And 10 seconds later, the doorbell went, and I came in. My wife said, "The wee boy's here. He saw Tommy's car." So he came in. Quite emotional telling this now. He came in, and Tommy really looked after him. And went out, and 10 seconds later, doorbell again, and it's my wife again. I said, "What's up?" And she said, "Everybody knows he's here." I think they're bussing in people from Old Kilpatrick. And we had to set up a system whereby they came in the front door, they walked down the hall, they get Tommy's autograph and all the rest of it, and they went out by the kitchen door. So we had a circular movement going on. And that went on for 48 hours. And at 10 o'clock on the Sunday night, my wife opened the living room door and said, "Burns." She always, in moments of stress and strain, she always called them Burns. "Burns, get out.
Yeah, time to go.
I'm taking my husband back." And Tommy folded his papers and all the chapters, and off he went. That was the end of the book.
Just a conveyor belt of Celtic fans streaming through your house to see their hero.
Yeah, really touching. I'd been there myself as a child. I knew how important it is to meet your heroes. Big moment, and where they came from, I do not know, because they certainly didn't all live in my street.
No,
but they were all there. And Tommy, I always say this of Tommy. Tommy loved the Celtic supporters on an individual basis. He didn't love them in blocks of 10. Loved them in the Jockstein stand. Loved them in any other stand. He loved everyone, man, woman, child, on an individual basis if they were a Celtic fan.
Yeah. In terms of the content of the book, Hugh, was there anything that Tommy was particularly keen to be included or even not to be included? Was there any kind of conversations that way?
He did not want it to be, it's a well-known thing that some footballers' biographies can be quite racy. It can be about gambling or alcohol or women or a combination of all three. And he said to me, "Don't want it to be like that at all. I want to tell my story, truthful story of the upbringing, what the upbringing did for him, what Celtic meant to him." As I say, he loved Celtic. He didn't hate any other club.
Mm-hmm.
So he wanted that to be conveyed. And for it to be a truthful representation of his life. And I wonder why, because I'm as perplexed as anyone why the book remains so popular 35 years after it was published.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the truth of the matter, and this place that he holds in the hearts and minds of people. He's always true to himself, true to his club, true to his faith, and you could only stand back and admire him.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any creative differences during the process? Anything that you maybe disagreed on?
No, I've had moments with other players where they've no, take that out, but it was almost as if you became Tommy. You get such an insight into his character that you didn't want to let him down in any way. The only problem I had was that Tommy would take each chapter and he would show it to everyone. And the ages before you got the chapter back, I don't know if he needed anyone's approval, but he was being absolutely certain that he wasn't in any way offending anyone. Mm-hmm. So it did take a while, but it was worth the wait.
You've shared your own important and fairly emotional story, Hugh, about the time Tommy spent at your house and the time he spent with those fans individually. And I think so many Celtic fans, thousands of Celtic fans globally, if not closer to home here in Scotland, have got their own tales and recollections and stories of Tommy. One that stands out for me, I've mentioned John Kushley to you, my good friend's dad, and Kush was a Celtic player. For anyone who doesn't know, Kush was a Celtic player during the Lisbon Lions era. Very unfortunate to be a centre-half when a guy called Billy McNeil was around at Celtic, but a good centre-half in his own right. He then went on to work with Tommy in the Celtic Academy, in kind of later years. John sadly died of motor neuron disease, same horrible disease that took Jimmy Johnson in March 2008. And Tommy Burns then delivered what I can only describe as an incredibly emotional eulogy at Cush's funeral. Less than 2 months later, in May 2008, Tommy himself was gone. And I think that says so much about him as a person that during his own toughest times, his own toughest struggles, he took the time out to kind of look out for others, to care for others. And that in itself sums up Tommy Burns, not the footballer, not the Celtic guy, just the man, just the person.
On the day that he lost the League Cup final to Wraith Rovers, I went home, and it was such a shock to the Celtic supporters. And the following night, Tommy was to do an evening with Tommy Burns. I had a pal, Father Joe Mills, who at that time was parish priest at St Pius in Drumchapel. And he needed £1,200. There's the story. He needed £1,200 to repair the church's heating. And I said to Tommy, you do an evening with Tommy Burns and we'll get the money for wee Joe. Of course, son, of course. Now, he's lost the League Cup final. He's the Celtic manager. I'm back home and I said to my wife, I've got a disaster in my hands because he's never going to turn up for this. Now that, it's literally 24 hours after he's lost the cup final. So on the Monday night, I was in the house and I really didn't know what to do. And he said he would pick me up at 7 o'clock. Wasn't there. And I thought, right, I'll have to go round and just say to everyone, look, I'm very sorry, money will be refunded, etc., etc. And the car came into the street. And my poor wife was distraught on my behalf and everyone's behalf, and she ran out in the street and the immortal word came out again, Burns, you're giving my man a heart attack. And it was in to the house, quick cup of tea, we went round to the function suite where the night was taking place, and to say it was packed is an understatement. When they talk about people hanging from the rafters, there were people hanging from the rafters. And he did the night. He was sensational. He spoke to the Celtic supporters about their disappointment and how he regretted being the cause of their disappointment. And at the very end of the night, and he was rapturously received. And somebody said, Tommy, if you sing Mac the Knife, we'll put in more money. And he said, right, go on then. Get your money out. And he sang Mac the Knife, and it was arguably the best performance I'd ever heard him give of the song. And my two daughters were collecting the money, and they were saying to me, Dad, there are people throwing £5 notes and £10 notes. And I said, just take it. It's for Father Joe. Just take it. And I left them, Father Joe, Tommy and me left, and he was like the final scene in It's a Wonderful Life. He was rolling up the cash, and I said, Joe, I'll just leave you to count that. I'll call you tomorrow. And of course, he got much more than he needed. And that's because Tommy Burns wouldn't let him or the Celtic fans down, no matter what happened 24 hours earlier.
Yeah, amazing. And it's a testament to Tommy Burns, even at that time, but that's just not something that you would imagine a modern footballer or a modern football figure to do. There's so many excuses not to do these things in modern life.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine Brendan Rodgers if he had lost the cup final against Rangers on Sunday, 24 hours later, appearing at a Celtic function and singing at the end of it? But Tommy Burns I believe that there's a working class fundamental element to Celtic, and he represented that, and he would not let them down. Would just have to go over the disappointment and move on. And he got his reward when he won the Scottish Cup.
Yeah, absolutely did. You have talked there about John Kushley and others who Tommy Burns himself inspired, but here's a question. Who inspired Tommy Burns? And that can be people he looked up to, whether it was in the footballing sense or in his life. Who were his inspirations?
I think Mr. Steen, as everyone referred to him, Sean Fallon, they looked out for the young Tommy Burns. There was an occasion when he was at a match in which he was not playing, and he was in the stand, and I think it was Sean who said to him, "Where's your coat, son?" And he said he didn't have a coat. And at the end of the week, he got something extra in his pay packet, and that was to buy a coat. So Tommy, he almost didn't sign for Celtic, and his dad in the boardroom said, "Thomas, this is Glasgow Celtic." And he said it just was like an electric shock. He remembered what he was doing, and he came out the front door a Celtic player. Mm. So the story of the club, the history of the club, what the club means to people the world over, he never forgot that. It was his driving inspiration.
What about in the years that followed his sacking? Tommy Burns, like all of us, was so desperate to stop Rangers' seeming charge towards 10 in a row, and thankfully we did stop it eventually as a club, but Tommy Burns wasn't able to do so. How did he respond in the aftermath of that? You said that he proudly and rightly walked out the front doors, and so he should have. But what's the months and years that follow for someone who wasn't just Tommy Burns, he was Tommy Burns of Celtic?
Yeah.
How do you adjust to that?
In the same way that he adjusted to not being a Celtic player, he told me that when he played his last ever game for Celtic, he went home and he sat in the dark most of the night. He took it in his own way. When Fergus McCann came into Celtic, and I remember being at the World Cup in America, and Fergus McCann called me, among other journalists, and said, "Who do you think should be the Celtic manager?" And I said, "Tommy Burns." Even though I'd had the conversation with Tommy, and although he was young, I thought it was his destiny. And I said to Fergus McCann, I know it's not the be all and end all that he's a massive Celtic fan, but better to bring that kind of enthusiasm to the club, and he's an undoubted young managerial talent. What happened thereafter? Fergus, consummate businessman, and Fergus McCann is a huge part of Celtic's history. The man who made the stadium what it is today, the man who gave them the business structure that they thrive on to this day. But Tommy Burns wanted to stop 9 in a row, and Fergus McCann wanted to rebuild a club financially, structurally, and 9 in a row didn't mean anything to him. And Tommy could not understand this, couldn't get his head round it at all. But what happened. And Tommy would never ever hold a grudge against Celtic, or even against Fergus McCann on a personal level. They were cut from different cloth. So he just had to readjust to life. But it was always his destiny to go back to Celtic Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never ever forget Gordon Strachan, when Tommy passed, coming into the press conference, and I've never seen a man look the way he looked. So that was the effect that Tommy had on everyone. But Celtic was his life, and he wasn't going to let the fact that he had been let go by Celtic damage his love for the institution.
You mentioned Gordon Strachan there, and Gordon Strachan had pretty good success at Celtic at a time when Celtic were downsizing to an extent. Won 3 titles in a row, qualified I think for the last 16 twice in the Champions League. Done pretty well. And when asked about the greatest thing about being Celtic manager, he said it was the chance to meet and become friends with Tommy Burns. And that was the one thing that he picked out of all the things that he could have picked out. And that says a lot, doesn't it?
Oh, I remember the Gordon addressing the crowd and saying, I didn't come here as a Celtic supporter, but I'm going a Celtic supporter. And I thought, Tommy Burns done a right good job in you.
Done a number on him.
Well, you know, we went out one night to St Mary's. It was a night for the school Janny. And Tommy, you need to come with me. So Tommy, Rosemary, my wife and me, he came and he picked us up. And my wife, of course, not knowing the etiquette of football, it's a lovely car, Tommy. What's it cost? And I said, don't ask the man that. But Tommy told her.
Right.
So we drive to St Mary's, and I said to him, where are you going to park? He said, here. Hey, park here. He said, Hugo, Thomas Burns, diplomatic immunity. So we went in, we had a fabulous night, and we came out, and somebody or a group had tried to wrench the front door off the car, the driver's side door. So I said, what are we going to do now? So to cut a long story short, we were in the car. Tommy held the door on with his right hand. Left hand drove the steering wheel. Rosemary, in the passenger seat, changed the gears. And I said, Tommy, what are you doing? But he drove us home because that was his promise, I'll take you home. And he came into the house, and he'd a lager shandy, always made a lager shandy, a half lager shandy. And we were laughing at it, at the memory of it all. He just a lovely man.
Yeah. You've mentioned, or we've both mentioned the Gordon Strachan era, and it was Gordon Strachan, I think, that brought Tommy back as a coach in 2005. And there's an image, and it's one that's well worth sharing, and I'm sure you'll remember it, Hugh. Celtic had qualified for the Champions League. I'm sure we beat Spartak Moscow in a penalty shootout. Artur Boric made a big save. And all the players run down to celebrate in the corner, and who's there on top of the pile?
Yeah.
It's Tommy Burns. At that point, I don't know, mid to late 40s,
Yeah.
a coach, the guy that should be keeping a lid on it. And at that point, that wasn't Tommy Burns, the Celtic coach. That was Tommy Burns, the Celtic fan. It's
Yeah.
a great image.
The Celtic fan was always there inside of him and never left him. I remember that night because we were doing live commentary with Neil Lennon on the commentary team. And he let out this incredible sound when it was all over. And at that, as you say, bedlam then, Lenny is whooping and hollering into a microphone. Tommy's halfway up the track, swallow diving into a group of players. And that was him. I never come across anyone who loved Celtic quite as much as he did. And, you know, Gordon Strachan, still talks about him, and no one can quite get over the fact he's not there anymore.
Yeah, and as you say, 16 years on, but still as fresh as ever.
Well, I was doing the breakfast show with Radio Clyde at that time, and Rangers had lost European final in Manchester the night before, and I got a phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning to say that Tommy had gone. And they said, you need to do it live on news. The newsreader will talk to you. Just need to do it live. And I said at the time, this is not about the death of a football star. This is about the death of a woman's husband. This is about the death of a father to 4 children. And this is about the death of a grandchild who will never know his grandfather because Cole had been born a matter of weeks before Tommy died. And I said, football cannot hijack death. Yes, he's Tommy Burns of Celtic and always will be, but you have to remember Rosemary, the children, the grandchildren, because that's the way Tommy would have wanted it.
Yeah. Hugh, you yourself, you're a long time in the world of Scottish football. I think it's now over 50 years. In fact, you told me you're going for 55.
January 5 next month. I'll be 55 years in the business.
Okay, so been around the block and then some. What does it therefore mean to you at this stage in your life, Hugh, and in your career, I suppose, to be bringing this story back to life?
It means everything to me. I'd never for 1 second imagined that you'd write a book and 35 years later they'd bring it back out again. He meant an awful lot to me, and for this to be back out, for my family, I gave the book to my 3 children 35 years ago, gave them a copy each. And now I'm giving it to 6 grandchildren. So that's how life moves on. And I've got 2 regrets. One is that Tommy's not here to see it back out. And the other one is that Rosemary's not here to see it. But I hope it means something to Jonathan Burns, to Jenna Burns, to Emma Burns, to Michael Burns. I hope it means something to them to have their dad back on sale.
Yeah, I've no doubt that it does, Hugh. The book in itself, it's re-released this week to coincide with Tommy's birthday, 16th of December. Is that something you worked on deliberately, or how did it come to be that was the...
No, I left that entirely to Celtic. Once we had arrived at their way of doing it, I gave Celtic my copy of my book, and I asked them, I took it personally to Celtic Park, and I asked them not to post it back to me because I don't want to trust it to the postal service. Although the fine body of men and women, I'm sure they are, but things do go astray, particularly at Christmas time. So I said to them, I'll come back out and get it. And I'm going back out this afternoon to get it.
So, some folks think you're not allowed in Celtic Park these days, Hugh. Is that a myth?
Oh, that's a popular mythology. They were with Brendan. It's been great. My grandson has a very special autograph book with a very special message which Brendan Rodgers put into it. I've taken them all on the stadium tour, and the gentleman doing the tour said, "You must have seen all this before," but never seen it through their eyes. And that was the important thing.
Yeah.
And that's why now, my daughter is 52 years old now. Therefore, she was, quickly do the arithmetic here, 17 when I gave her the book. And to hear her say, the only one I know with a signed copy of Twists and Turns, the Tommy Burns story, the only one I know who's got Tommy Burns' signature on it. Mm-hmm. But to hear her say, I would never, for any amount of money, part with this book. That's what it means to us as a family.
Yes, it's something to be cherished. It's a great thing to have. Hugh, I mentioned at the top of the piece the fact that, it is now coming out 35 years down the track. There'll be so many folks that book will resonate with, certainly folk of my ilk and my dad and others of those ages. But what about the younger generation? Do you think it will strike a chord with young folks who know about the legend of Tommy Burns without really knowing the story?
Yeah, I imagine it's like when I was a child. When I was a child, now your dad will know what I'm talking about, but others can look it up, Google it. When I was a child, I thought Charlie Tully was a member of our family because there was a portrait of Charlie Tully above the mantelpiece, and people used to talk about Charlie, and I had just assumed that it was growing up that it was a relative, and it came as a surprise to me that he was actually in the team. So I remember in 1955 being taken there by my father, and Charlie Tully was pointed out to me, and I thought he was an uncle or something. But so Tommy Burns, for young people today, the stories will have been passed down from generation to generation about Tommy and about the games for Celtic and what it meant to him. So, as I say, it was Charlie Tully for me, Tommy Burns for others, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. As mentioned, Hugh, we're recording this week, the week of Tommy Burns' birthday, and the book is out now. I know it's available at Celtic stores and online. And as I say, it must be almost surreal for you. You know, you've written several books, several football books, but to see it back in print, it must be quite a strange thing.
Yeah, I passed by the Celtic store in Clydebank the other day on my way to Radio Clyde, and I was taken aback. It was there on the shelf, and I thought, my goodness, you know, I really and truly can't believe this. You know, at the age of 75, Tommy and I, in the younger days, I've got a photograph in the house, and it's Tommy and me. We're all suited and booted, but one of us has clearly had a very good night, and the other one has obviously been the driver. And I'll leave you to work out who was who. And he wrote on it, "All good thoughts, your friend Tommy Burns."
Yeah.
And he always did that, all good thoughts. And I remember, you know, sitting in the office when the book had just come out. And the cover, of course, Tommy's got the Scottish Cup. And the lady at the front office, Jean, again said, "Tommy Burns here for you, but he wants you to come out to the front desk." So I went out the front desk. He said, "Come on out in the street, sir." I said, "What's up?" And he opened up the boot of the car, and there was a crate of champagne in there. He said, "Your mother's birthday, son." I told him that my mother, the following Saturday, was going to be 70, and we're having a party in our house. And I thought, Celtic won the cup on Saturday. This is Monday night. Crate of champagne. You've nicked that from the boardroom. No comment, son. No comment. But such was the story of Tommy Burns that on the Saturday night, you bring out the champagne. Now, my mother, wee women from Partick who took us to Drumchapel and so on and so forth, a widowed woman. And she said, "Champagne, how much did that cost you?" I said, "Didn't cost me anything." "What do you mean?" I said, "Tommy Burns gave this to you." And of course, floods of tears.
Mm-hmm.
So many stories that bring him back to me.
Yeah, and you know, it's been a genuine pleasure to sit here, Hugh, and share some of those stories and genuinely feel how much Tommy Burns, as I say, meant to you and still means to you. You know, that endures, as we said earlier on in the piece, and it's great to see that the book's brought back into print. It's not one that I've read so far. I've not managed to read it over the years. I'll certainly look forward to reading it now, Hugh. And just as we wrap things up, I guess I'd ask for your final comments. Yes, certainly on the book, but also your thoughts for today on Tommy.
My thoughts are that he will be in the Celtic history forever. Everyone, you know, if you were thinking about Celtic, you would say Jockstein, the Lisbon Lions, Martin O'Neill, Brendan Rodgers now. Celtic having got the 119th trophy. Brendan Rodgers having 10 trophies as Celtic manager. the real highlights, the first 9 in a row, the European Cup final in Lisbon in 1967, doing 9 in a row for a second time. Moments that will resonate with fans, but always there's a place there. The story is incomplete without Tommy Burns being in it somewhere. As player, as manager, as coach, as being the one who said after a cup final on television, with the Celtic supporters in the background, they're there and they're always there. Supporters know what he meant, and the supporters will love him forever.
Yeah, just Tommy Burns, he lives on in the Celtic story, Hugh, and it's amazing that even more so now with the re-release of your book. So it's huge. Thanks to you for spending some time here back in the Celtic Exchange today. Goes without saying, Hugh, we wish you every success with the book. Thanks for sharing your stories, and we'll speak to you again really soon.
Thank you very much.